Hey guys, welcome back to another DIY video. This video is on the mobile that I handmade for my son's room before he was born. I knew I wanted to make something myself rather than purchase it from a store. I wanted a really specific look, and it turned out exactly how I imagined it, and I'm so happy with it. So I thought I would do a little DIY tutorial on how I made this happen. So my husband and I actually had to do IVF to get pregnant, and we were doing that process while COVID was happening, which was obviously very stressful. But fortunately for us, it was successful after a second IVF transfer. So we got pregnant with my son, and at the time we did not find out the gender until he was born, which was extremely exciting. I have a 10-year-old as well, and we did not find out the gender for her, and I just knew what a great experience that was. So we wanted to repeat the same, and it really was. My husband got to announce the gender to the room. I had a C-section, so that was a really amazing moment for him and something that we'll never forget. But I really wanted to show you my nursery planning DIY room we put together before he was born and before we knew the gender. We had a really specific look that we wanted. I wanted to kind of have a boho, neutral, southern type space. My husband is actually from Houston, Texas. His parents still live there, so I just wanted to really pull in a little bit of that into this space, because yes, I'm from Canada and we live in Canada, but he is not from Canada. So I wanted to pull that in and make something really just fun, simple, and gender neutral. Stay tuned to the end of the video if you want some info on how I decorated the rest of the nursery and where I got my pieces from. Okay, so let's get into the actual mobile here and stop the sappy talk. So I had seen a ton of Cactus, Boho plant style mobiles on Pinterest. I will show you them here because they were my inspiration. So I saved all of these as Pinterest hoarders do, especially when pregnant, and I was trying to figure out how I was going to make this happen because I do not sew. Out of all the things that I can do and DIY and crafts, I do not sew. It's not my thing. I'm terrible at it. Isn't going to happen. So I knew that sewing and using felt and all of that was just not an option. So the other material I knew that I could use and I've used before was clay. I prefer to use the Sculpey oven bake clay, and I will show you the images here. You can use whatever clay that you would like, but this is what I have used in the past and I purchased again. I also got an embroidery hoop because I knew that that would be the best base to hang my cactuses or plants from whenever I did end up making them. Now I used the inner circle from the embroidery hoop, although obviously it's on my mobile right now, so I can't show that to you. So this is the outer hoop with the actual little silver tab at the top, and then I used the inner hoop, which didn't have any hardware on it at all. And I purchased white string as well. I wanted something thin and very airy feeling as opposed to chunky. Originally, I had contemplated using twine, but it just came off way too rustic for the space. So I went with nice, clean, thin white string. I already had acrylic paints, and I'm a big fan of just using as much as I can that I have already without going out and having to purchase all new items. So I have a bunch of acrylic paints that have been sitting in the basement, so I grabbed out some colors from that. I also needed to have supplies like sandpaper to sand the edges of the clay when I was done making the shapes, as well as the Sculpey clay adhesive in case I wanted to stick pieces together, the gloss glaze for when I was finished making the pieces and had painted them, and I also needed tools. So I had actually a little plastic knitting needle and some old paintbrushes and a little wooden honey tool as well from the kitchen that I wanted to use to make indentations and other designs in the clay if needed. and I sat down and got to work. I definitely used Pinterest pictures as my inspiration for cutting out my shapes of the cactuses, and I kind of built from there, making them my own, but I wanted to make them look like the inspiration photos that I loved. So I cut out shapes that were similar to what I saw in those photos and had them on hand as references. And then I also did other styles as well. And I actually looked up a lot of pictures of decorated sugar cookies, oddly enough, I know, but for inspiration to get the ideas for the shapes and the items that I wanted to make for this mobile. So I did cactuses, yes, but I also threw in a cowboy hat or western hat, and I did a Texas star as a nod to where my husband is from, and I did kind of a southern rustic skull as well to put with everything. I did attempt a western boot, and as you can see in some of the photos, but I just ended up scrapping it because it didn't suit. It wasn't big enough, and it just didn't fit the theme at the end of the day. As you can see, the Sculpey oven baked clay, it's really smooth and white and squishy and easy to work with. So I just simply rolled this out on my mat to about 1/8 of an inch, if I had to guess or estimate for you. And then I kind of marked out roughly what shapes I wanted for my cactuses, scrapped a couple of them, re-rolled it out. I actually used a little plastic needle that I use for my knitting to go in and carve out these shapes, and then I smoothed the edges with my fingers. Important thing to remember when making these, no matter what shape, size, doesn't matter what your theme is make sure you poke a hole in the clay before you bake it so that you have a place to put your string through when you're making your mobile. So the actual pieces themselves I made totally on the fly from scratch, not really knowing how they were going to turn out. And it was rather ambitious of me because the first thing that I did was make the cowboy hat. So for the cowboy hat, I had to look up a bunch of tutorials on cowboy hats that were desserts, so like cake pops or cupcake toppers or sugar cookies, to figure out how to make this kind of very 3D realistic cowboy hat shape. So basically what I did was I took a cup and I traced a circle in my clay, and then I was able to push in 2 of the sides of that circle with my thumbs to create that kind of curved, rounded, tipped up shape of the brim of the hat. Once I was done that, I had to make the bucket part of the hat. So I actually took a golf ball, any rounded object, small rounded object would do, and I took my clay, another piece of clay, and I rounded it around the top half of the golf ball just to get a curved, rounded shape. After that, I then took my finger and I created kind of that dimpled top center of this half circle to create that dimple like cowboy hats have in the top. Really gentle with this part because you don't want your clay to collapse from its shape that you just made off of the round object. So I dimpled it in really gently with my finger and then tapered in one end of the half sphere, I guess, to get that tapered cowboy hat look. And then when I was done, I took this shape, set it on top of my circle that I traced out with the cup. I cut around it so that now the circle I traced with the cup had a hole in the middle. I then took my little bucket hat and I put it into that empty space. So basically I wanted to have the effect that when I turned this whole piece over, I wanted it to be like you could really put a head in this hat or a doll's head. So I placed the bucket part into that spot in the center where there was no clay anymore, and then I meshed the 2 pieces together by taking my fingertip and just slowly going around the bucket and blending the 2 pieces of clay together so it was attached to the brim of the hat. I finished this piece by painting it in a couple of shades of brown and layering them, and then I actually went in with my sandpaper and I distressed a bunch of the edges because I wanted it to look like a vintage rustic cowboy hat. And for the rope, I just used some cream tone paint and finished that off, and then topped it with a glaze like all the other pieces that I made for this mobile. This piece definitely took some fiddling, but it was actually really fun and it turned out really well. And it didn't need to be perfect and crisp and clean because I wanted it to be like an old vintage cowboy hat. But I love the effect that when you look at this from all angles, it really does look like a mini 3D hat. Next up were the cactuses. I started with a simple cactus and just cut out a rough shape of what I wanted. Drew some lines in it with the end of a paintbrush, and then I created the little flower that I was going to place on top. This was fairly simple. I just took a small piece of clay and kind of cut out kind of a star shape in it. Used my knitting needle actually to draw the little indents in that petal shape, and then I added a small flattened circle of clay into the center and kind of indented it a little bit just to be the center of my flower. The other cactuses were a really similar process, cutting out the shape, indenting with lines to make it look more natural, and then adding whatever embellishment I wanted, whether that was one flower, multiple flowers, or actually one of my cactuses has little balls of clay that I stuck all over it and then painted a really vibrant color. And I actually, on that particular cactus, didn't do a flower. I did a little heart at the top. I also used a kind of vintage brown wash on a couple of these pieces. This cactus included, just to add a little bit of depth, the cowboy hat and also the western skull. And it was just fun to be able to play around with these and make them my own, choose what colors I wanted. Some were cool toned, some were warm toned. And it was just really nice to get to do something fun and creative and make them my own and get to play around with all the colors. I do also, quick note, recommend priming all of the clay pieces. I did not do that, and I had to do multiple coats of paint. I really suggest spraying these with a white spray paint first or painting them white first just so you have a nice base to work on. The last two pieces were the Western Skull and Texas Star. So for the star, I simply just cut out a star shape and divided it up as I had seen in an inspiration photo, painted it the colors I want. When it was dry, I actually went in with a gold Sharpie and I went around the edges with the gold, and I filled in the little indented star in the front of it with gold as well, and then glazed at the end of the process. The Western Skull, I also used inspiration from Pinterest, actually from cookies, again, decorated cookies, and I just drew in the little details with the tip of the knitting needle and indented the clay a little bit and then textured it by poking really tiny holes just into the surface for texture and depth, and then painting it. I did use, like I said, the brown vintage wash on this one as well, just to give it an extra kind of rustic vibe. Don't forget to read the instructions specific to whatever brand of clay that you pick up from the store to make for this project. Last but not least was actually hanging these on the embroidery hoop, which meant I had to wrap the embroidery hoop in the white string that I purchased. This was tedious. Take your time because you don't want these wraps of string to overlap each other. This took a lot longer than I thought it was going to because the string was so small. So basically I just tied a knot in one spot and started from there. I just started really slowly wrapping and pushing this string to make sure it was all next to each other and nice and in line, and I just had to take my time. So when you're done that process, it feels amazing. Tie it off, make a knot, and then you can actually decide how long you want your hanging string to be from. These I just quite simply tied to the embroidery hoop and made sure that my knot was on the inside of the hoop so you wouldn't see it. After that, I was able to tie my clay pieces to the embroidery hoop. I simply took the string, wrapped it through the hole I had left in each clay piece, and then tied it onto the embroidery hoop at the length that I wanted. I did staggered heights for this, and I tried to make sure that my knot on the embroidery hoop was either at the bottom or on the inside of the embroidery hoop so you wouldn't see it as much. And then I adjusted the heights as I went. This was such an awesome and creative project that really kept my mind off the stresses of pregnancy, especially so late in the game. And it was fun to plan, it was fun to create and get my hands dirty doing it. And I hope that it's inspired you to maybe grab some oven baked clay and create your own pieces in any theme you want. You could do something farmhouse with plants, you could do boho, you could do sports, you could do moon, stars, and sun. You could really do anything you wanted with this. And I'm so proud of myself that I made this and it gets to hang in his room and he loves looking at it. He looks at it every single morning when I go to get him out of his bed. And it's just, I hope that it's inspired you to do something fun and creative and DIY for yourself, for your nursery, or any room in your home, really, because this doesn't have to be for a baby's room. This is just a quick peek at the rest of the nursery, which at this point was still unfinished. There needs to be trim around the window and some other things that need to get done as usual. There's always a list. But I actually revamped this MCM dresser that I thrifted off of Facebook Marketplace. It had a little bit of damage on the outside, so we painted it white with mineral fusion paint, which I love the look of with the wood drawers. And I got one of the changing baskets off of Amazon that I loved. A mirror, stool, and carpet are all from Homesense. The carpet is machine washable. And I actually got my mom to recover the seat on this rocking chair that I got from a thrift store when my daughter was, before my daughter was born. She's 10 now, and I paid $30 for it. So I kind of freshened up the wood and had my mom recover the seat for me. And the rest was just bits and bobs that we picked up, other than the crib, which we purchased from Best Buy, actually, on sale. And so that is my nursery. The only other thing that I really liked that I put in here were my little wire baskets that I hung on the wall for book display and swaddle blankets to be rolled and put in. I had scored those for $2 each from a thrift store. I also made my own labels for these really cute amber lotion bottles that I got off of Amazon and put them on this cactus shaped stand that I picked up from Homesense. Again, I loved these Moses baskets. We ended up using this so much for my son, not just for changing him, but for him to just lay in the living room when he was a newborn and we could have him around beside us on the floor. I used both faux and real flowers and greenery in his room because, let's face it, new moms don't have time to water plants, as well as a little cactus hook that I found at an antique store to hang his little hats from. And that was and is my nursery. Obviously, now that my son is about 15 months, things have changed, things are chaotic, and his room doesn't necessarily look like this all the time. But that is what I pulled together for my DIY boho / Southern inspired nursery. I hope that you've been inspired at some point in this video to do something DIY for yourself, whether it's for a nursery or other, and to get creative and work with your hands. I love how this nursery turned out. I'm very happy with it. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you're interested in more DIYs coming your way. And to end this video, here is a cute picture of me and my family. Thanks for watching.